You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Welcome to Autumn on the Air. Today we're featuring a fascinating intersection of science, history, and Wisconsin legacy as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, also known as WARF. Our guest is Doug Moe, an acclaimed Wisconsin journalist, biographer, and author. Doug's storytelling career spans 40 years with thousands of newspaper columns, magazine articles, and numerous acclaimed books. Doug's been honored as best columnist and best author in Madison, and his biographies have chronicled some of the state's most influential figures. Doug's latest book, Saving Hearts and Killing Rats, Karl Paul Link and the Discovery of Warfarin, dives deep into the remarkable story behind one of the world's most important medical discoveries. It's a tale rooted in Wisconsin, shaped by scientific curiosity, and made possible by WARF's enduring commitment to research and innovation. In April, the book was named the Wisconsin Book of the Month by the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Today, we'll explore why Doug chose to tell this story, the dramatic events and personalities behind the discovery of warfarin, and why the legacy of Karl Paul Link and WARF still matters a century later. Welcome to the podcast, Doug. So excited to have you here on the air.
Thanks, Lisa. Good to be with you.
Well, Doug, you've had an amazing career and you've written about so many Wisconsin icons and their stories. What drew you to Karl Paul Link and the discovery of warfarin as the subject of your next book?
The truth is, it goes back a decade. I was writing a daily newspaper column at the time when Tom Link, Karl's son, who lives in Madison, showed up at the paper with a big box of scrapbooks and newspaper stories and said, you should write a book about my dad. As I say, I was writing 5 columns a week at the time, and so I really didn't have the bandwidth for it. A decade on, I wasn't at the paper anymore, and I reached back to Tom, and he was still interested, and I was interested, and off we went.
Wow, that's amazing. Did he say what motivated him to reach out to you about his dad's story?
You know, I don't think he ever articulated it, but it became pretty clear to me as I was working on this over quite a few years that he wanted to honor his dad. You know, he, as you could guess, as a son, knew what his dad had accomplished, and thought he was worthy of a book. And I'm really glad he did.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, and I mean, you've obviously done a lot of research, having read the book myself. Was there a particular moment or detail while you were doing your research that absolutely convinced you that you needed to tell this story now?
You know, that's interesting. I knew right away that Karl Paul Link was somebody who deserved to have a biography written. Again, being honest, I think it's really interesting that the book has just come out now in spring of 2025. And if anything, I think the timing now that the book is coming out is really fortuitous. You know, given Link's life in the lab and at the university, and how the import of university research,
exactly,
and tech transfer organizations, and that, you know, for that to be being questioned as it is today in some quarters, I'm glad the book's coming out now.
I am too, because warfarin's had a tremendous impact on people throughout the world. And I think it's a shame, unfortunately, right now, the level of questioning that science is going through. And hopefully we'll right the ship at some point.
It's just a phase, let's hope.
Yeah, let's hope it's just a phase. So you obviously spent a lot of time researching the book. How did you approach researching both the personal side of the story and the scientific side? Because there's a lot of different components to Dr. Link and his life.
Link died in 1978, and so many of his contemporaries weren't around to interview. But he had an amazing archive here at the University of Wisconsin, over 30 boxes. So I was able to access that. I was able to do probably a dozen or so original interviews. A couple of his grad students, later grad students, were still living. I interviewed Hector DeLuca, another very prominent biochemist at UW. But it was that archive that was really gold for me. And that was both personal and scientific, because his personal correspondence was there as well. And it's interesting, Lisa, because I thought, as I'm doing it, somebody who's doing my job, or a job like I did with the Link biography 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, those letters, which I drew on so heavily, they're not going to be there for the most part. It's going to be a lot harder.
Definitely. And he was an avid letter writer from what I read in your book. He was writing all the time, it seemed like. All
the time. And often, he would put the time of his correspondence, and it would be 2, 3 in the morning. But yeah, and a lot of his outgoing letters don't survive, although he made copies, so some did. But the incoming correspondence from all over the world was a treasure trove for me.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. In 20, 30 years, they're not going to be there. So we're grateful that you were able to take the time you did to go through them all. How long did it take you to write this book?
If I go back a decade to when it was first broached, I would say 10 years, but that's clearly, it didn't take that long. There was periods. There was a period during the pandemic when I couldn't get into his archive at the library here in Madison. So I would say several years if you put it all together to research and write it, and that's not unusual.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And I want to turn now to talk about the discovery of warfarin itself. And it's really an incredible story, but I thought maybe I would paint the scene a little bit here. It's February 1933. So I'm just envisioning, I'm getting cold even thinking about, winter here in the Midwest. And this desperate farmer named Ed Carlson, he shows up in Madison with a dead cow, some buckets of blood, and it's the oddest type of blood. It's red in color, but it's more water-like than blood than anything else. And some spoiled sweet clover hay. Walk us through what happened that day and why that is so pivotal in this story about warfarin.
Yeah, Carlson was from St. Croix County. It was a farming family up there. I have a very good researcher, genealogist, who was able to trace the family and their arrival in America and coming to Wisconsin. Ed Carlson in 1933 was 21 years old. His father had started the farm, and his cows he was having a terrible problem with his cows dying because their blood would not clot. They'd have internal hemorrhaging, or they'd bump up on barbed wire or bleed through the nose, and it just wouldn't stop. So in desperation, an early February day that year, bitter cold, snow predicted, he piles it all into a truck and drives to Madison looking for the agriculture experiment station, which I think a vet up in St. Croix County had suggested they might be able to help you figure out what's going on. It's closed. So somehow he gets to the biochem building, and Link was there on a Saturday. And that Carlson told him, what was happening with the cows. He had the bucket of blood. He had the sweet clover hay. And Link was not ignorant of the sweet clover hay cow issue, but it had just been in the past few months, really interesting timing, where he had heard about I believe it was a Minnesota professor and one from the Dakotas who were doing some studying of sweet clover hay and cattle dying. But all Karl could really tell him at the time was, it is probably something in this sweet clover hay. We don't know what. Try a different feed. And Carlson says, okay, sort of, and drives off. Karl's assistant was there that Saturday, and the two of them had a very meaningful conversation where the assistant said, we got to help. And this may be destiny that this guy showed up here. And Karl, who was started a really successful budding career as a carbohydrate chemist, really changed direction. And he and his lab began to look at that sweet clover hay, the spoiled hay, and try to figure out what it was in that hay that made the cow's blood not clot.
And it was an arduous journey for them. They spent 6 years working on it. And there were, some colleagues of Link, Harold Campbell, Charles Hubner, Ralph Overman, and Mark Stallman, who all played really key roles in unraveling this mystery and ultimately synthesizing the compound that became warfarin.
Yeah, they were his graduate students. And indeed, 6 years, up to like 10,000 assays where they, on rabbits and, just trying to figure out what it was. And they were looking for what they came to call the hemorrhagic agent, HA. And Karl, in speeches later, said it literally, it was like a needle in a haystack. But they kept at it. And one day, 6 years on, it was Campbell who isolated it. And fairly quickly then, they were able to reproduce it synthetically and came up with the first iteration of a human anticoagulant that's called dicumarol.
And it was an amazing story. They faced just incredible odds. Like you said, thousands of experiments. Talk to us about some of the biggest scientific or maybe some of the personal hurdles that they faced along the way.
Well, I think it was the fact that it was taking so long and that they weren't sure that they were ever going to, that it was ever going to bear fruit.
Yeah.
So I think Link, I was able to find some speeches he gave where he talked about what is important in a scientist. And, it was interesting. He had a number of things that he mentioned, but I think the perseverance was right up near the top, higher than sheer smarts. And so I think that was a big part of it.
It had to have been. I mean, they spent so much time and did so many experiments. It was incredible the perseverance. I completely agree with you on that. I want to go back to Ed Carlson for a second. What else do you know about him? Because really, we mentioned persistence just a second ago, but he was, I think, equally persistent because he wanted an answer for his cows. So tell us how his persistence also helped shape medical history.
Well, it did. To me, Lisa, frankly, the most interesting thing is, as I started researching the book and my genealogist helped me find that, I should say that there were people who doubted, as years went by, people who doubted Link's story. Karl Paul Link was a colorful individual.
We'll get to that.
When it would not have been, totally out of the realm of possibility that he certainly might have improved a story, if not invented it sort of whole cloth. But we were able to find the farmer Carlson up in St. Croix County. And as I was piecing it together, I was able to reach out and find one of Ed Carlson died in the 70s, but his son was an emeritus professor from UW-Stevens Point, and I was able to reach him, and we had a phone conversation. I told him what I was doing, and he said, my dad never mentioned it.
Really?
Yes. So there's every possibility that Ed Carlson did not know that what transpired from him showing up in Madison with his cow and the bucket of blood. I mean, you think about it, Link, if you read the newspaper stories, as I did back in 1939, 40, 41, Link didn't mention it then. It was only like a decade later when he started giving speeches that he started telling the Carlson story. And, there was no internet, Ed Carlson did not have a Google alert on his name, right?
Yeah.
As I say, his son never knew.
Wow, that's incredible. And I mean, because really, we may never have even gotten warfarin if it wasn't for Ed Carlson. This story might not even exist.
Yeah, certainly not, and probably at least not right away. I mean, as we mentioned earlier, there were those scientists in the Midwest who are starting to investigate, and you would think that at some point they would have thought about, well, maybe this can have a human benefit there, but yeah, certainly not. So thanks, Ed Carlson.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me that he just never knew what happened as a result of this.
I think, because you would think his son would have known, and he did not.
Well, a lot of people are very familiar with warfarin as an anticoagulant, but it also has some uses as a very powerful rat poison. How did the team and the world come to realize that it could serve both of these purposes? Because that's really unusual for a pharmaceutical to also have use as a rat poison or a poison of any type.
Well, it is, and it was problematic, which we can get to when they first started to consider marketing it and things for humans. But I guess that it was a rat poison first. I mean, you had the earlier iteration of the anticoagulant, which was called dicumarol, and that was in the early 40s. Link, in the later 40s, 46, 47, he battled tuberculosis a few times during his life. And he was in a sanitarium in Madison, 1946, and started reading about rodenticides, and it dawned on him, he said later in interviews, it dawned on him that possibly they had done, many, many compounds before they came up with the one for dicumarol. And it dawned on him that maybe one of the stronger compounds could work as a rat poison, a rodenticide. And he had his lab folk, his grad assistants start looking at that, and he got involved. And sure enough, they developed what they call compound number 42, and ended up patenting it. And Karl named it. They had one of the organic compounds in the sweet clover that caused the blood not to clot, what's called coumarin. And so Karl combined the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, WARF, which is a tech transfer that patented the compound. WARF and coumarin became warfarin, and that's what we know today.
And there's also a story you talk about in the book about a serviceman who tried to overdose on the warfarin and survived, and that actually ultimately led to it being discovered as an anticoagulant. It
did. It was 1952, and I believe it was out in Philadelphia, and a serviceman came into a service headquarters area in pretty bad shape, but alive. And it turned out that he was depressed, and he had been ingesting warfarin, the rat poison, and in an attempt to commit suicide. And he didn't die. And when word got back to Karl Paul Link and his team in Madison, they began to think, and Karl actually quoted Hamlet. He didn't shuffle off this mortal coil, as typical Link. And it became evident to them that maybe this would be a stronger, a better human anticoagulant, and not have terrible side effects for humans. Karl had his number one assistant, Colin Schrader, start looking at it, and they actually developed a little bit of a derivative that they called, was a water soluble, called warfarin sodium. And pretty quickly, they reached out to the clinical partners that had done dicumarol and started doing some clinical trials. And the really tipping point, I guess, for warfarin as a human anticoagulant becoming not widely accepted, I guess, or was President Eisenhower had a heart attack in 1955 out in Colorado. And he went to a military hospital there, and Link in Madison received a postcard. And it was from a former colleague in Madison who is now working at the place in Colorado. And he said, they're giving President Eisenhower one of your anticoagulants, and it's not dicumarol. So immediately, Karl and his commercial partners know, basically 99% sure, that they're giving President Eisenhower warfarin. They couldn't really publicize it, there weren't HIPAA laws, but you couldn't write about the president's treatment without, really knowing. And it wasn't until Karl gave a speech in New York in 1958 that he confirmed that indeed it was warfarin. So that became the blood thinner that we all know today.
Yes, still widely used. And I want to talk a little bit about Karl's personality, because we've alluded to a couple of times. He was a very colorful character. And you paint him as being brilliant, which he was, outspoken, humorous, and sometimes extremely controversial. What surprised you the most about his personality as you researched his life?
I guess what a big personality he had. You alluded to some of the traits there for sure. One thing I found, there's no medical diagnosis, Lisa, but I'm pretty well convinced that he was what we would now call manic depressive, bipolar, because he would just have these amazing spurts of energy, but then they would be followed by a very down period. He was a very collegial scientist. People talked about that a lot. His grad students, and yet in his life he had at least 3 very significant, controversies with individuals. Serious fallings out. So he was a complex character. I guess that didn't surprise me, but the more I dove into it, the more that became apparent.
Yeah, and he was a big guy. He liked to dress a little bit differently than everybody else.
I found one of the sources I should credit was the Wisconsin Oral History program here at University of Wisconsin. It's fabulous. The longtime secretary of the biochem department, Ann Terrio, gave an oral history interview, and she talked about, this is early in Link's career, she talked about how on State Street here in Madison, she and some girlfriends would get together for lunch at a diner. And they always saw this guy come striding in with a cape and, spats and just looking, kind of bohemian, really, if not Frank Lloyd Wright-esque. And she said, then I took a job at biochem, and all of a sudden the guy that we thought was a poet walked in, and it was Karl Paul Link. So, yeah. And I think he played that up. We have a photo in the book of he spent some time in Scotland as a grad postdoc, really. And there he is dressed as Uncle Sam in Scotland. So he had that aspect of his personality.
Definitely. And I think another part of his personality that I found fascinating was he was very big into activism, and he supported a lot of groups here on campus. And in fact, in the 1950s, during the McCarthy era, he called out 2 FBI agents in his class. I thought that was hilarious in the book, that were, I guess, assigned to kind of keep an eye on him because he was so activist.
Yeah, he, these student organizations on campus then and probably now needed some sort of faculty advisor. An advisor could just, it didn't mean a close association even, but they needed somebody to identify with them. And there was a couple in the 50s, Labor Youth Organization was one, that were having trouble getting any kind of faculty. It's 50s, it's Wisconsin. As George Clooney says on Broadway this season, the junior senator from Wisconsin.
Exactly.
McCarthy loomed large. And Karl volunteered to be the faculty advisor for these organizations. He was a natural anti-authoritarian, I think. There's a chapter in the book on his work with calf scours, which was apart from his blood anticoagulant work, where he ended up taking that work down to North Carolina and getting into big controversy because he talked about it in the paper, and the Board of Regents got involved and called him in, and he sparred with the Board of Regents, and they ended up censuring him. Karl liked to point out that in the same meeting they censured him, he got a raise, which I don't think it was an individual raise. I think it was a segment of the faculty that got a raise, but that again was typical. tell him you have to do something, and he's going to bridle at that.
Absolutely. And he had, going back to your point about controversies, some pretty significant ones. I mean, talk to us a little bit about his controversy with Mark Stamm in particular. That one got particularly nasty.
Yeah, and it was, to my mind, the most unfortunate one, Lisa. The first couple, one was with his advisor in Scotland when he went over there. It was significant because his name was James Irvine, and he was probably the preeminent academic at St. Andrews University. And Karl felt he was usurping the students' work and claiming it for his own. And there was Karl rebelled, and, Irvine made it very difficult for him then over the next few months. The second one was Harry Steenbach, who was a scientist.
I was going to ask you that.
Okay, well, yeah, he's absolutely, we can get to Steenbach. That was certainly equals, because Steenbach was as big, if not bigger, reputation-wise than Karl. But the one with Mark Stamm, Stammen was a grad student of his and had been on the dicumarol patent, the first one with the others. But he was also on the patent for warfarin, the second patent, with Karl and a grad student named Akawa. So they were, two of the three names on the warfarin patent. But as time went on, Stammen left for a while, then came back to Madison, and the two could, by the early 50s, they could hardly be in the same room together. And I tried to parse out what exactly happened, and I couldn't be exactly sure. But Karl would not mention Stammen when he talked about warfarin being discovered, and clearly Mark had a significant role in it. But Stammen, he equally tried to diminish Karl, and after Karl died, he gave an interview where he said, "I don't believe the story about the cow and the cow's blood." So it was not typical of Link, especially with underlings, to feud. But there's no getting around that happened, and that it's unfortunate.
Yeah, definitely unfortunate. Let's go back to Harry Steenbach, because, inventor of vitamin D irradiation, like you said, probably even bigger in terms of, I think, fame than maybe Karl was. Very different personality, a play by the rules, keep the lid on things, versus Karl, as we've talked about, not doesn't really like authority, and he used the press a lot, or wrote letters a lot to the press to kind of try and, we'll say, maybe influence things. So talk to us a little bit about what happened between the two of them.
Yeah, polar opposites, really, personality-wise. I found out that they're, other than just two big personalities, maybe not, ever going to be best friends. They had a disagreement over who should chair what was then the ag department, ag chem, now biochemistry department. They each lobbied for somebody else, for a different person, I should say. And then I found one of these oral history interviews that I reference with another biochem prof who claimed to have been in the men's room at the biochem building when Link and Steenbach actually almost came to blows in the men rooms. I referenced earlier Ann Terrio, the department secretary, and she told the story of she was sitting, Link was sitting in her office in the reception area of the department. And at one point, Harry Steenbach walked in, saw Link, and turned around and walked out. And she said, Link took a piece of paper, Kleenex or something, like threw it after him. I mean, just childish. And she was quick to say that, that wasn't Karl with anybody else. But
they really irritated each other, didn't they?
They sure did. And it got in the press. Naturally, because of Karl. Again, not a fortunate circumstance, but the one that really sticks out is the one with Mark Stammen. Steenbach could handle himself.
So I want to turn now and talk a little about WARF's role and the Wisconsin legacy. You've talked several times about the crucial role WARF's played in supporting Link's research and bringing warfarin to the world. How did WARF's involvement shape the outcome? And maybe talk to us about some of the dilemma in terms of marketing the compound as well.
Well, It's a good question, and the easy answer is, without the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, that drug never becomes available to the public. It was Harry Steenbach back in the 1920s who decided that his discovery that would end up helping get rid of rickets needed a commercialization that had some rails on it, guardrails on it. And long story short, he ends up helping found WARF, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. Now, fast forward to Karl Paul Link, and they've got this discovery. They need to get a patent for it if it's going to be commercialized. WARF filled that bill. WARF then, of course, as folks may know, they turn around and some of the money that's generated goes to the inventors. Some stays with WARF. WARF in turn then donates significant, huge sums of money over time to the University of Wisconsin. So it's really hard to overstate how important WARF's role is in all these discoveries, and especially in the aptly named warfarin. Absolutely.
Any idea what that has brought in terms of royalties over time?
I don't have an actual number. It's now common domain, so that's not happening anymore.
Yeah, it's generic, as they say. Yeah,
right. But it was significant. It was significant for sure, and good on them.
Absolutely. And as you know, WARF celebrating its 100th anniversary. What do you think this story tells us about the power and importance of university tech transfer and public research foundations?
Lisa, we spoke at the outset about how important university research is and the tech transfer organizations that can get that research to the public. I think today in 2025, as the inherent value of that has, for some reason, in some quarters being questioned, it's astonishing to me. And I couldn't be happier that a book that celebrates that research and the good to humankind that evolved out of it, that book is out now. And I know there's going to be more books. There's probably a book every month that's published that highlights that. So, I very much hope that we're in, that this is a passing phase and that everyone will understand the value of that research.
Now, the warfarin story is one of scientific curiosity, collaboration, and real-world impact. Why do you think that still resonates today, especially in the context of WARF's centennial?
I guess what I said a moment ago. Without that research, without the patenting of that research, which the tech transfer organizations facilitate, we wouldn't have it. Simple as that. So, as I say, I think smarter minds, that's not probably a good way to put it, but I think on sober reflection, I think folks across any political spectrum will come to realize that we need this, we depend on this, and it's only going to actually be more exciting going forward with all the new things that are being discovered on campuses.
So what lessons do you hope readers and our listeners take from the story about Dr. Link, his team, and the discovery of warfarin?
Oh gosh, a multi-pronged answer, I guess. I mean, I do hope that they're informed and entertained by the book. I think Karl was a very human individual and had flaws, but my goodness, in terms of energy, good humor for the most part, collegiality, look what we can accomplish sort of mindset. And do it with some flair and have some fun with it if you can, but do good. And, that with him, he became, and his wife as well, nuclear power, anti-nuke activists. So be involved, cliche, but find something that you're passionate about and do your best.
Doug, one last question. Where can readers find your book, and how can they get in touch with you if they have questions?
Well, I encourage them to go to independent bookstores, and they may have to ask for it. It's Saving Hearts and Killing Rats. But any store can order it. Of course, it is on Amazon. My website is just my name, dougmoe.org. And there's a contact feature there. So I love to hear from readers.
Great. Well, Doug, thank you so much for spending time with us today to talk about the book. What an incredible book. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Lisa. I enjoyed it.
Doug, thank you for bringing to life this extraordinary tale of curiosity, perseverance, and impact. The story of Karl Paul Link, Ed Carlson, and the Discovery of Warfarin is a testament to how unexpected encounters, relentless inquiry, and the supportive institutions like WARF can change the world, not just for Wisconsin, but for millions of people everywhere. As we mark WARF's 100th anniversary, this story reminds us of why supporting research and innovation matters. It's about saving hearts, solving mysteries, and empowering the next generation of discoveries. Thank you, Doug, for joining us and for your dedication to telling Wisconsin's most important stories. And thank you to our listeners for being part of Autumn on the Air. Until next time, keep exploring the stories behind science.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at autm.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.